In today's session, we'll be talking about barreling without equity. First of all, I want to ask you, what spots do you find barrel without equity? Let's define that. So if the board comes ace high and we are barreling pocket deuces or pocket threes, we still have equity, right? We have two outs for a set. So the question is, when are we barreling without any equity, without any overcards, without anything connected to the board? Do you guys have any specific spots where you do that on a regular basis and you find it working? All right, so when we unblock villain's draws, this is important one, when our hand unblocks his folds. Bluffing flushes. Ferdinand says bluffing flushes. What do you mean by that? Bluffing monoboards, missed draws on the river. All right. So when flop goes check check against late position flutter, you barrel turn with every hand. Well, not every hand in theory, but you could barrel every hand against some opponents profitably. So as you see, there are infinite cases where we can barrel without equity. And that's why I decided to focus just on a few specific spots and keep it more practical this webinar so that we explore how we can exploit our opponents in specific spots rather than learning, why are we doing this and what part of range needs to be defending and memorizing things that as if you watched Tom's webinar about the big picture, memorizing doesn't work in poker. So I've chosen three categories of boards. First one, monoboards. I think Ferdinand said a bit about that. Monoboards, so three flush boards, and especially when completing another flush card on the turn, in those spots, there are no bluffs with equity. So if there are four clubs on the board, if we have another club, we have a flush. If we don't have a club and we're drawing for a straight, we could be drawing that against a flush already. So there are no natural bluffs with equity when it comes to monoboard. Then straight completing boards, these are the ones that I think are very difficult to nail just because how hard it is to be defending, one pair hands or even two pair hands on straight completing boards. And then the last one, which is a bit easier for the aggressor, is the locked boards. Ace highs or paired boards that are already locked and there are not that many draws. So the first hand example will be coming from the monoboards, and we are diving on a queen six deuce, three spades, UTG against the big blind for 30 big blinds effective. As we already know, we should be betting this board with a very high frequency. In practice, betting the whole range here, just because how strong our range is compared to the big blinds range. Of course, if we go to ranges, we're going to see how wide big blind range is. And, as a percentage of the whole of his whole range, the hands that have 60% and above are, around 10 to 15%, while in our range as the aggressor, as UTG, we have quite a lot more. So we're betting range on these boards. I'd rather bet, my whole range for quarter pot instead of mixing it up with the 55%, 33%, and 20%. It just becomes much easier to execute. So if we bet, let's say the preferred sizing here is 33%. If we bet 33%, what do we see from the out of position player that strikes me is, first of all, the check raises. So the check raises here, of course, the value comes from mostly flushes. We see all those flushes check raising, but not every flush. In fact, most flushes are just check calling, just because of how we want to be playing our range in general. We want to be check calling around 50% of our range and raising just 9%. So this is the overall strategy, and that's why we're check calling with most of our flushes. Well, the flushes that benefit to check raise the most from the big blind are the ones with a 3 or with a 4 that are unblocking the bet calls from the UTG or from the preflop aggressor. So we want to get caught with those flushes. So we're check raising, king 3 instead of jack 9. So this is first thing about the value, and I think in practice people check raise a lot more flushes, especially the low ones, because we tend to think that they need more protection. So 7-5 needs protection against, let's say, ace jack with a spade or pocket tens with a spade, and then by check raising more flushes on the flop, their range becomes weaker on the turn. Now let's see about the bluffs. So I'm going to exclude spades here and see that still there are a lot of hands without a spade check raising the flop. So deuce X, low deuce X, then some good shots like 5-4, 5-3, 4-3, 6-4 and 5-6 as well, because those can be turned into a bluff on some runouts, 3, 4, 5, targeting to fold over pairs or even a queen on some runouts. People, of course, don't do that. I almost never see players check raising deuce X or 6X on this board unless I'm playing, maybe a 1K plus buy-in. Now, when we go to the one spade bluffs, we're going to see a decent amount of 9x of spades, 7x, 8x of spades check raising, and those are bluffs that never really get check raised in practice, because if our opponent calls us, then another spade comes. What are we doing with a 9 high flush? It's just not strong enough. If we take those two population tendencies into practice, we're going to arrive at the turn with big blind having significantly weaker range, which allows us to be barreling a lot of hands without equity. So if we bet 1/3 here as UTG and the big blind calls, turn comes, let's say, another spade. So it comes jack of spades. There is some leading here in theory, but in practice, of course, nobody is leading this turn just because of how complicated the game tree becomes after leading on a 4 flush. Then they check their entire range, and now let's see what's going on. So we see from UTG, we see a lot of hands that have absolutely zero equity, like King 7 of hearts or King 8 of diamonds, Ace 4 suited without a spade. So Ace 4 hearts, Ace 4 diamonds. Now on the jack, we do have some small betting for value with Queen Jack, pocket jacks, all those hands that we connect with. But if we go on a turn that is a little bit more disconnected with the imposition range, now we see the clearer picture. We see our bluffs betting big and our value hands being King of Spades or better. So the Queen of Spades, the Queen of Spades is down there, but the Jack of Spades usually doesn't want to be value betting this turn just because of how many Ace X of Spades and King X of Spades we already have in our range. So for our value hands here, King of Spades and Ace of Spades, but look at our bluffs. So let's exclude again the spades from our range. And look at that beauty. So Jack 10, Jack 9, barreling at a full frequency, King 10, King Jack, barreling at a very high frequency without a spade. And why is that? Why do we barrel those hands? Of course, because we don't really have any other bluffs. So barreling 9-8 of here of hearts is no better than barreling King Jack off, because 9-8 can, even if it makes a straight, it's not a big deal. You know, we're not winning against a flush. So let's see now what happens against the big bet, so we can think in practice how successful this big bet is. So if we bet for 83%, in theory, we see that the big blind needs to be defending every 2 pair. So we see 6 deuce never folding, we see 7-6 never folding, queen 6, queen deuce, and this is against 83% sizing. So this is against the big size. Now, if we go to, the flushes, we start folding some flushes here from the big blind, such as, 3 of spades, 5 of spades, especially if they're with a king, and the king, king X comprises most of the in-position bluffs, such as king Jack, as we saw in king 10. Now, 6-5, if we go to 6-5, we'll see 5 of spades calling the turn every time. We'll see, 4 of spades calling quite a lot. And I think against the second barrel that is big here for 80% or 3/4 spots, let's say, I think people will have hard time defending their range. So they will not be able to reach minimum defense frequency from the big blind, which of course, if we node lock for that, having in mind the flushes that they check raised from on the flop, we spoke that population check raises more flushes on the flop from the big blind than actually in theory. Then they reach with turn with less flushes, and they need to be defending, more of these 4x low flushes, 5x low flushes, which in practice never happens. So those both arguments, they increase the EV of our barrels as the preflop aggressor with hands that have absolutely no equity, such as 10-9, Jack-9, 10-8, those hearts. Now, as we're going to the river, we have to keep in mind here that GTO range is significantly wider than the range that our opponent will be defending in practice and reaching the river with. So let's say river comes a blank, another 3 of hearts. Of course, big blinds checks again. There is no reason to lead this river, and we see the preflop aggressor blasting those bluffs, king jacks, those jack 9s, those 10-9s, those 10-8s. Now, we know that on the river, the big blind's range is a little bit stronger compared to the turn. Like on the turn, if he's folding the 4 high flush, 5 high flush, sometimes maybe even 8 high flush if he is a passive player, then he will not have them on the river. He will not have 2 pair on the river compared to GTO. So now when we bet here, we see that in GTO, from the big blind, we need to be calling queen 6, queen 7, most queen deuces. We need to be calling pretty much all 2 pair. Then the high flushes, from around 9 and above, we see here the EV of 9x being around 0. So that means 10x will be calling every time, right? And 8x will be folding every time. But also when we're bluff catching the river against an aggressive opponent, I think we need to be very precise with our blockers. So why is a hand like queen 5 with a 5 of spades better bluff catcher than 8-5 with a 5, even with 8 of spades? So this is a question for you guys. Why are we check calling the river with queen 5 of spades, but we're check folding with 8 of spades? All right. Any other suggestions? Tiago says that the queen doesn't block bluffs. So those are the two that I was looking for. When we are thinking about blockers, we want to be, of course, blocking their value range and unblocking their bluffs. In this spot, it's just very important to be unblocking their bluffs. That's why we see queen 6 without a spade calling, just because UTG does not have any queen X or 6X in his bluffs. And we can clearly see that UTG does not have any queen X and 6X in bluffing range. That means that we are safe calling those queen 6 and queen 7 and even, queen 4 and queen 5 with the 5 spades. So as we get to this river, we have to be thinking, are we playing against GTO? Are we playing against an aggressive opponent? Are we playing against a passive opponent? And now I'd like to draw some conclusions about this one. So population on this UTG against big blind monoboard. First of all, they under check raise the flop. As we saw, not check raising bottom pairs, not check raising middle flush draws, and in position they overfold against check raise. So I've made these little arrows here, and this is to connect the logic. So when we're thinking about psychology in poker, it works like that. If I am not bluffing this river, when I face the same decision on the river against somebody else, I'll assume that he's not bluffing it as well. So when we're playing 10 tables, for example, and we face a tough decision on the river, we are going to play out of our own bias, out of our own understanding of the game. So if we are not check raising deuce X or bottom pair on this Jack 6 deuce board, this means that we'll assume other players are not check raising those bluffs. So we'll be overfolding against a check raise. And I just went into a brief explanations about those, disconnected logic here. So if population under check raise the flop, then they're overfolding against a check raise. If they're under bluffing the turn, then they're overfolding against the turn barrel. And if they under bluff the river, then they're overfolding against the river barrel. So the main exploits that will be taken out from this spot, first of all, as the player from the big blind, we need to be check raising the flop with a higher frequency, just because how hard it is for players to be defending their range against a check raise. And I want to show that because I didn't show it in our example. So if we check raise from the big blind, what happens is that UTG needs to be defending pretty much all pocket pairs, even without a spade. So pocket sevens without a spade, pocket eights without a spade. Then defending the 6X that they have, defending some king jack without a spade, which is crazy. Like, this will never happen. This will absolutely never happen. You check raise queen 6 deuce, 3 spades. Nobody is defending king jack without a spade. So going back to our exploits here, check raising flop as the big blind will be the first one on the mono flop, and then over bluffing the turn as the pre-flop aggressor, just because of how hard it is to be defending, 2 pairs and low flushes against a big size here. And then last, when we reach the river as the pre-flop aggressor, we have to be very careful about what kind of opponent we're playing against. If he's a passive opponent, we should not forget that he probably folded most of his, low and middle flushes by the river. So he's left with just the strong flushes, and he's probably calling most of that. So we need to be shutting down the river. If we're playing against somebody who is more sticky, then he has a lot of low flushes from the turn going into the river. We can bluff him off those hands. Now, another mono board I want to take a look into is the one that we're playing out of position, low jack against button. So 7-6 deuce, I chose this one as it is low card, so there are no pairs. There is a question before that. When we exploit him for folding too much, don't we get to the turn with a super wide range and he's super tight? Isn't that a sign of slowing down? Tiago, are you talking about when we check raise from the big blind? Yeah. Well, the exploit of check raising from the big blind with those bottom pairs is very easy, because when we get called, we are just giving up a lot on the turn, just because of our assumption that our opponent is defending less on the flop, so he's arriving at the turn with a stronger range. And then if the turn improves our hand, let's say with those low pairs, gut shots, to a pair and a gut shot, then we can keep barreling to fold him off, some of the pocket pairs. But in general, if we are check raising this spot, we definitely need to be slowing down on the turn. Hope this answers the question. Now, we are on a 7-6 deuce 3 spades playing low jack against the button. Of course, in this spot, we're not betting a lot out of position. Why is that? We see equities running pretty close. We see our 80% hands, 90% hands being just 5% each. And we see significantly stronger range for the in-position player than it was when we were talking about big blind against UTG. So now, out of position, we don't want to be putting money in the pot on this mono flop. So we're checking, and now this is where the fun begins. So as the player from the button, let's just exclude the flushes from our range and see our overall strategy. So in position, we are firing pretty much most of our no equity hands. So Jack 9 of hearts has nothing on this flop, but still barreling around 80%. A lot of ace highs barreling, a lot of kings highs, king high barreling. We'll see some king jack, all those overcards, king queen barreling. Of course, they're not barreling at a full frequency, just because if we barrel at full frequency all the offsuit combos, we cannot offset the amount of value that we have, or actually the flushes that we have in position. When we go to the flushes, we see our flushes here from the button are not that many. They're just those mostly suited broadways, a bit more on the ace high side, and some 8x, 9x. So the first thing that strikes me when I play this board from the button is how wide are we going to prop the flop, and then let's see the response against this stop. Now the response out of position needs to have around 17% check raise. And why is that? Of course, because he checked almost his whole range on the flop, and now he has a lot of hands that need to put more money than just 20%. So pocket aces with spade, pocket kings with a spade, check raising almost full frequency. As we go lower, we'll see, the 9s, 10s check raising a bit less, just because of how many flushes they're blocking. So, the 8x is blocking less flushes than the ace of spades, of course. And the old, my favorite, old saying, strong hand put money into the pot. So aces with a spade check raising, aces without a spade check raising. Now, the first thing about this flop, the white stab, and when button stabs, not only that low jack in practice is not check raising those, ace, probably pocket tens to such frequency because they already bet it on the flop out of position because it's easier to play, but also those jack 10, queen 10, queen jack with one spade, all those hands, that are very tough to play as a check raise, because when we check raise, let's say queen 10, 10 of spades, and turn comes a spade, again, the question comes, are we strong enough? What are we doing? Are we betting? Are we checking to bluff catch? What bluffs does he have? So this is one thing. Out of position player check raising a lot less, which allows us to be stubbing flop even more. And another thing is how wide the out of position player needs to be defending this flop against the 20% stop just to reach the minimum defense frequency. And you can see ace jack without a spade, ace 10 without a spade, ace queen, ace king. All those hands are check calling the flop to almost full frequency. We'll see some king jack even without a spade, king queen, quite a lot of king queens without a spade check calling the flop. So this is about how to play button. Now let's see how to play from the low jack. So we check the flop, and now flop goes check check. Flop goes check check. Turn comes. Thiago. So I'll come back to population tendencies in this spot. Now, turn comes another spade, and now the board is 4 spades. So we're thinking, what should we do with our king queen without a spade? What should we do with all those, queen 9 of hearts? What are we doing with ace 4 of diamonds? Now there are 2 options here. First option is bet big on the turn and try to get immediate fold equity. Try to get immediate folds. So betting with the big size, we see that button needs to be defending quite a lot of one pair hands such as Jack X that he didn't bet the flop with. He needs to be defending a little bit of ace queen without a spade, even just to defend his range. He needs to be defending a lot of pocket pairs without a spade. The higher ones not so much because they're blocking bluffs, but the low ones, the fours a little bit, the fives a little bit. And now this is one option. If it's easier for you, just bet the turn big and then give up the river because we isolated ourselves against a strong range. But I'd suggest doing another thing. Now, out of position from the low jack, we can go for 20%, and we see that actually the preferred sizing here is 20%. It could be 25, it could be 30%. It doesn't really change that much in practice, but let's say the small size. So we're betting 20% on the turn. We see now quite a lot of one pair hands need to be defending in position. So we're keeping the range of in position player a lot wider now as we bet with the small size. So actually every 9-8, every ace queen needs to be defending, 7x, 6x that they have there defending. I think against the 20%, we'll see still overfolding, but we'll see a wide enough range that we can barrel off on the river. So river comes a blank. Doesn't really change much, but I just like the 3 hearts on the river. So river comes a blank, and now all those hands that we started bluffing on the turn, so all those queen 10s, king 10s without equity, we can profitably barrel on the river because of how wide the out of position range is. 9-8s, 10-8s, 10-9s. And now when we go for the big size, so this one is around 2/3 spot. What do we see? We still see Jack 8. So Jack X needs to call with a high frequency. We see, pretty much every flush needs to call against the big size on the river, and it's just very hard to happen in practice because imagine this spot. We go check on the flop. As the out of position player, we have all the flushes. We have, a lot of ace X, king X, even queen X of spades. And then on the turn, it comes jack of spades. We are betting button calls. On the river, we still have all those strong flushes and we're going for a big bet. Well, it is going to be very hard for the player in position to call enough with his one pair hands and even with his flushes facing the big bet here. And not only this, but also the amount of bluff raising here will be zero, because people just don't like to be raising into a range that has some nutted hands. So as the other position player, we have quite a lot of ace-x of spades here, and nobody has the balls really to be bluffing this in position. Now about Thiago's question. First of all, we spoke about how do we play from the button. Population under bluffs flop as the button. So our exploit will be to overstep if we're at, in button's shoes. Then on the turn, population under bluffs the turn and overfolds against the turn bet from the button. So as low jack, people will not be finding the 20% bet on the turn enough. And because they're not finding it, they will not find the calls against you when you bet there. So our exploit here will be overbluff the turn for the small size. And then on the river, as we bet 20% turn and we kept in position range wider, we can be bluffing with a very, very high frequency, having the nuts in our range, not worrying about being check raised, and just making a lot of, one pair hands and even low and mid flushes fold because of how strong it is to bet when you have that many nutted hands in your range. Now, enough about monoboards. We're going to jump into one of my favorite spots. It's the straight completing boards. This time we are playing cutoff against the big blind, ace, queen, 10. So on this board, 50 bigs deep, we don't want to be using the range bet small size strategy here. Why is that? Does anybody have an explanation here? Why are we not betting the flop with the small size for range bet? We have the nut advantage. This is true. Our range has 66% equity. This is also true. We need to charge draws. Another big argument here. So all those are valid arguments. Deeper SPR means that we want to be getting as much money as we can by the river with our nutted hands, and of course getting as much fold equity with our bluffs. Now we're from the cutoff, and here we're playing quite a wide range, but still betting for 100% frequency. Now the preferred sizing is around 55%, and why is that? It is because this is the perfect size to make Jack X good shots and King X good shots with the backdoor indifferent or close to indifferent. And it is the right size to be folding King X and Jack X without the backdoor, as well as make some 10x fold, put the pressure on bottom and middle pair. So 10x and Queen X. Now, what happens here in terms of check raises? We see big blind check raising decent amount on this flop. It is not, of course, not so much. It's around 7%, but in practice, this is often played as a zero check raise. Even from high stakes regs, when they face high half pot here, they very hard. They find bluffs. It's just very hard for them to find bluffs as check raises, and that's why they just don't check raise their value hands. In GTO, we are check raising the low gut shots. We prefer those Jack 3, Jack 4, so that we're unblocking a bigger part of the bet folding range of the cutoff. And for the value, we are check raising some frequency of King Jack, of course, keeping the other King Jack in our range to be to have some strong hands on the turn. Otherwise, it will be easier to borrow from the cutoff. And then check raising quite a lot of ace jack to charge those weaker ace highs, those pairs and gut shots. And then ace 10 for the two pair, a little bit of ace 9, and as we go down, we're just purely calling all those ace x hands, most of the queen x hands, and 10x with a backdoor. So in practice, we'll see probably close to zero check raise. So how does this change the turn? When the jack comes or king comes, now there is only one card needed for a straight. So in this case, it is the king. And because we have so many king X from the cutoff, we can continue barreling a lot of hands that have absolutely zero equity. So 6-5 to 9-6, 9-7, all those hands that have absolutely nothing on this turn, and they're barreling so that they can fold out a lot of one pair hands. We of course have those 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s through 9s barreling the turn, and this is because those are the hands that are just very good bluffs because they're unblocking his folds, and also they can improve to the best hand. If our opponent has 2 pair, we can win by hitting our 4 on the river. Now we see quite a lot of 10x being turned into a bluff, and then queen x and ace x checking back mostly. Now when we use again the half pot sizing, we see something that again never happens in practice. And what is that? Check raising straight from the big blind. Nobody's check raising straight from the big blind here because it is very, very hard to find bluffs. And people just think that when they check raise their straight on the turn, their hand is being turned face up. And this is true, of course, when nobody can find the bluff on this ace, queen, 10, jack run out. Why would you be check raising this king X straight when you can just check call and get EV from letting your opponent borrow the river? On the turn, big blind needs to be defending a lot of ace x, starts folding some ace x, and then every 2 pair, of course, that get check called on the turn. So queen 10, ace 10, ace 10 actually being turned into a bluff because of how many straights is blocking. But of course, nobody finding that in practice. And now think about the river. When we go to the river, in GTO, big blind doesn't have that many straights. But in practice, if people are check calling these straights and they're check folding ace x here to a higher frequency, which will happen very, very often, this means that their range on the river is significantly stronger, has significantly more straights as a part of the whole range than GTO. So when big blind calls here, river comes deuce. Now we see in position barreling the bluffs that are blocking this king x. So mostly 10x, mostly jack x as bluffs. Of course, some frequency of those low, 4s, 3s, 5, 4s, just because of the fact that we don't have enough jack x and 10x. Those are only suited combos, or those are only 3 combos each. Then, of course, against this big size, big blind needs to be defending mostly king x and then a little bit of ace x, a little bit of queen 10, but these are not that many combos. And in practice, if out of position has all those king x hands on the river and they have significantly less ace x on the river, this will mean that we should wave the white flag at this point, and the highest EV on this board will be the bet check line. So let's just summarize this one. So cutoff against big blind, 50 big blinds, ace, queen 10. First of all, from the big blind, people are not check raising this flop. So if they're not check raising this flop, from the cutoff, they're not calling enough against a check raise. And I want to demonstrate this in our example. So on the flop, cutoff bets 55%. we're check raising. And now cutoff needs to be defending queen x with the backdoor, needs to be defending almost every ace x there. It doesn't matter if it has a gut shot or a backdoor. A7 is just a pure defense against check raise. Needs to be defending even some 10x with the backdoor. Quite a lot of jack x, quite a lot of king x with the backdoor. So the first exploit here that we are going to do in practice is to be check raising this flop at a higher frequency because the cutoff will be overfolding. So we're applying the same logic here. People never check raise this flop as a bluff, so they always fold against the check raise. So we're going to counter this by check raising this flop a lot so that we get immediate folds with our jack x, with our king x, from those ace x hands, from those one pair hands that the cutoff is supposed to continue with. Now, the second one, population is under bluffing the turn as cutoff. Like they don't find enough low pocket pairs. They don't find enough 8 high, 9 high, 10 high, jack high to bluff the river. And that's why when they're getting borrowed, so when somebody borrows against the big blind here, big blind overfolds on the turn. And of course, under check raises those straights on the turn, which means that, those two assumptions that we have leave big blind's range significantly stronger on the river. So we should be very, very picky with our bluffs in position. I'd suggest we just bet, check. But then if you think your opponent is a better player, successful mid-stakes or high-stakes player, then he's defending the big blind against turn barrel, then we have to be very precise with our bluffs on the river. So bluffing jack x, bluffing 10x, those pairs that are blocking the majority of the straights, that are blocking the straights from the big blind. So be careful here when we bet to not be just blasting money on the river with 8-6 of hearts, because the big blind will have a lot of straights and we'll just be losing money with this river barrel. Now, the spot that I think is easiest to nail by most players, this is the locked boards spot. So jack 6, for example. Now we are playing hijack against big blind with 30 big blinds. Of course, we are betting this flop with a very, very high frequency with the smallest sizing. In fact, I'm often just betting one big blind on this flop with my whole range, as it is just so easy to execute. And also, it is so easy for big blind to be overfolding. Now, let's look how does the big blind react against the small percent range bet. First of all, we see a lot of check raising. What is the reason for check raising here in theory from the big blind? What is the reason for check raising with such a high frequency? You see check raising 21%, check calling 22, 23%. So we're check raising as much as we're check calling, and we're just folding the rest. Can you find me one good reason? Why do we want to be check raising from the big blind against the range bet? Deny equity, Rafa's guess. I like it. Somebody else? All right, we have more jack x. Let's look at that. We actually do have more jack x as a number of combos, but as part of our whole range, we still see that the hijack has higher frequency of 70, 80, 90% hands, just because of how wide the out of position range is here. We see those jack x combos being 12% of hijack range and just 8% of the big blind range. So yes, we need to prevent imposition from running us over. This is a very good argument that I think answers the question to a big part, as well as denying equity, which are of course related. So when we check call the flop, we are allowing our opponent to realize his equity in position and to be barreling turns and rivers. And this is why we check raise very high frequency our 6x from the big blind, just because this 6x can get in a very tough spot if we check call and then hijack barrels, turn, and river. On some runouts, it'll be very hard to call down with the 6x, while if we check raise the 6x, we will be making money against all those, ace high floats, king high floats, backdoor straight, backdoor flush floats. So 6x needs to be check raising the flop here at a high frequency. Of course, quite a lot of jack x check raising the flop here. We see majority of our jack x check raising the flop. And then we see quite a lot of backdoor straights, backdoor flushes, check raising from the big blind. We see those, ace 3 backdoors, ace deuce backdoors, those targeting, the higher aces to fold by the river, especially if they get a good turn. So the first thing that makes an impression here is that, of course, people are not check raising as much from the big blind. So when they face one big blind here, I think it is just much easier to call these hands like queen, king, queen, hands like, ace 10 with a backdoor, or even without, doesn't matter. It's just much easier to call these ace highs, these Broadway hands that have the backdoor straight, that have decent equity, against pocket pairs, against ace highs. And I think in practice, people are just check calling the flop with those hands at almost 100% frequency, check calling quite a lot more 6x. So yes, people learn to check raise the flop with 6x, but still not doing it with such a high frequency. And of course, those 9 highs or 7 highs, 8 highs are either check raises or check folds. So having those things in mind, we are arriving on the turn, and big blind's range is significantly different from GTO. First of all, from the big blind, it's very easy to find the value check raises in terms of jack X. So from the big blind, it's just very easy to be check raising the yes, Thiago. It's very easy to be check raising the turn with jack X, but not so easy to check raise the turn with, let's say, ace 7. It's just not very intuitive. It's hard to find. It's hard to have the intuition to check raise ace 7 of diamonds on this flop, to not get run over or to not get borrowed on future streets. So there is a question about how do we play the turn when we check raise and we have a 6. First of all, the first thing that we see against the check raise big blind is folding just 25% of the time. And this is mostly offsuit hands that did not connect with the board that much. So all the backdoor combinations, backdoor flush combinations continuing on the flop, except for some, lower ace X, which are blocking the bluffs themselves. So first of all, we are printing money by check raising this flop, just because of how the hijack will be overfolding the flop, not being able to defend against a check raise with, let's say, 9-7, 100% of the time. Re-raising or calling doesn't matter. Nobody is defending such high frequency 9-7. Now, when we call, and the river comes a low card, this is to answer the question about 6x. We'll see quite a lot of 6x continuing for a small size. This is to deny equity of all those floats, all those king highs, all those queen highs, all those 10-9 highs, these ace highs, as well as make money against the ace highs. Now, how do we approach on a high card? This is a good question. Let's say it comes a king. Turn comes a king, and we're checking all the 6x. So it is logical here that because most of hijack floats come from king x, queen x, ace x hands, we'll be checking the turn with a 6. And now, when we check, in position player wants to be betting with a small size, first of all, to fold out big blinds auto folds. So bluffs like 9-7, for example, that check raise the flop, or 7-4 with a backdoor, they just don't need more than quarter pot or third pot to be folding. I'll be playing the quarter pot here, actually, and I think it's better in practice. It's just enough for people to be folding their auto folds, and also we want to be betting wide. So we want to be betting for value with our, king X, especially the strong ones. We want to be betting 10x, we want to be betting 10s and 9s. But this differs a lot in practice, because look at that. Why is hijack not betting pocket 10s or pocket 9s or pocket queens with a high frequency here? So why hijack is not betting pocket 10s or pocket 9s here? This is certainly a strong hand to bet. Like, it's strong enough because 6x, yes. Part of the reason is turn check raises. Actually, the whole reason is turn check raises. Let's look at that. Now, betting for third pot, and we see 11% check raising. So 6x is just check calling on a high cards, letting those queen 10, queen 9, 10-9 barrel off. We need to be calling this 6x, because otherwise we'll be folding, one of the strong hands in our range. But also, when we are on the hijack, when we bet for 33%, we will not get check raised with such a high frequency. So here on the turn, overall strategy of the big blind, high card, we need to check. The hijack usually bets, and then we can be check raising those trips. So we are going for a double check raise. In practice, this never happens, and spot plays straightforward. Just big blind betting his jack X, betting his turned draws, and check calling 6x, and almost never check raising the turn in practice. Now, how much do you think the field slow plays the jack X? So if we start from the flop, we are always thinking not in absolute terms, but in relative terms. So in relative terms, jack X is check raising the flop in practice at a higher frequency, because bluffs are hard to find out of position. Those queen 10 off, king 10 off, people just don't find them that often. And then because people are don't have enough check raise bluffs, and it is easy to find the check raise with the jack, I think on the turn, jack X is a higher percent of population's range than GTO range. Then on the river, on the turn, when it comes, let's say, a king X, but regardless on the turn, I don't think people learn to be double check raising this texture, or to be checking jack X at all on the turn. So they're just firing with their jack X, they're firing with their turn draws. So for example, it'll be 10-9 here, it'll be queen 10 here, and then betting the jack X, as well as missing, of course, those low 5 highs. Actually, the flush draws might be there, but the other ones, the diamonds will definitely not be there. Now let's go back to barreling here without equity. So the turn comes. So hijack betting small size, big blind check calling, and then turn comes 4 of hearts. So pretty much a blank turn. Let's see the beauty of the game here. So because of how many jack X, big blind check raised on the flop, we get to be barreling our no equity hands with a very high frequency here. So if we see the 9-7, it's not only the hearts, it's also the spades, diamonds, and the clubs barreling with a very high frequency. It's not only queen 7 hearts, it's all other combos. And when we go to the offsuit combos, we'll see those king highs and queen highs barreling with a very high frequency to be targeting the ace highs of the out of position player. And because against the big blind needs to be defending a lot of ace highs here on the turn, that will be hard to defend. I think those turn barrels will have even higher EV. So we see the king 10, of course, heart with a heart blocker will have higher EV, so higher frequency of barreling. But even without the heart, I think if we not lock for the big blind check calling more the flop with the king highs, queen highs, check raising more of his jack X, then we'll get a very, very profitable turn barrel with those no equity hands. And now, of course, when it comes down to the sizing, as Siko implies, we can find enough fold equity with the smaller size. But I'm thinking if we're targeting the ace highs of the out of position player, we want to be betting bigger here, so it's easier to fold out. If we are targeting, his ace highs by the river, then we are betting smaller on the turn, letting him call with ace high, and then barreling the river, folding out his ace highs and 6x. And now we see on, let's say, blank river. Now we see those 10-8s, 10 highs, 9 highs. They're barreling the river with a very high frequency in theory. And when they bet, we see that they're making 6x indifferent, but also big blind needs to be calling the strongest 6x, so ace 6, king 6, because of the blockers that they're blocking ace jack, king jack combos, as well as 6-5, 6-4, 6-3, because they're unblocking the bluff combos, because they're unblocking 10-9, they're unblocking 10-8, they're unblocking 10-7. So going back to the conclusions for this spot, we're talking about jack 6, big blind against hijack. First of all, population check raises value heavy. So they're check raising more jack X, they're check raising less bluffs. And of course, we follow this logic when they face check raise from the hijack against the big blind. They are overfolding against the check raise because they are not check raising enough bluffs themselves. So as an exploit here, I think check raising 6x on the flop, check raising all those bluffs work very, very well from the big blind, just because of how hard it is for the in-position player to be defending 70%, 75% of his range against a check raise. And then on the turn, population definitely under bluffs, so does not barrel with those king highs, queen highs, 10, 9, 7 high, no equity hands. So because they're not over bluffing the turn from the hijack, they are over folding against a turn barrel from the big blind. And then on the river, of course, when population bets the flop and bets the turn, they are expecting that the big blind continued with a very, very strong range, probably 6x being the weakest part of the range. And when somebody bets for triple barrel, it is just hard to find bluffs. So people are bluffing flop, bluffing turn, and then most of the time checking the river because of how strong the big blind range already is. And now what can we do? First of all, as I said, check raise flop from the big blind, over bluff the turn from the hijack as the pre-flop aggressor, and over bluff the river as the pre-flop aggressor, because people will not be able to find those river bluffs themselves. So they will think you didn't find them, and they will be having very hard time to be calling those ace-6 or king-6, 6-4, 6-3, 6 deuce. So at the end of this lecture, I'd like to make a conclusion, and it is a very, very practical one, because I saw during the series a lot of people blindly following theory, analyzing hands, just seeing people giving argumentation because the solver does that. But this is not enough of an argument to be making decisions out of it. So if the solver does that, this does not mean this is the best play in practice. And I know you already know that, everybody knows that, but it's just a bit hard to be executing this when you're playing 10 tables after, 2 weeks of series going on. So while playing and while betting on a certain street, always think about how is the population perceiving your bet. So how is the population playing in your shoes, and then deriving from this logic the best play. So if the population is not check raising on queen 6 deuce 3 spades, is not check raising bottom pair, middle flush draws, then they will not be defending against a check raise as the pre-flop aggressor. So we always need to be countering the perception of the population, right? If population perceives that we don't have a bluff in this spot, then we need to be having more bluffs in this spot, because people will be overfolding, right? For example, if the board is paired, Jack 6, and we are betting flop, betting turn, coming to the river, and people don't think that they don't find the bluffs themselves on the river with those air like queen 10, king 10, or 10-9, then they will not be able to defend 6x on the river, as we saw in the last example. And now deviating accordingly. So not following GTO on when it's, I find people following GTO whenever it's easy for them to follow. So if it's easy, if it's logical, they follow it. If it's not logical, so if it's not easy to lead the turn on a 4 flush, if it's not easy to lead, let's say when the board pairs twice on the turn, they just don't do it, because it's just a very complicated part of the game tree that it's hard to execute. So if people deviate from GTO, we need to be deviating accordingly. So we need to be exploiting that. And sometimes it is by waving the white flag. So on the straight completing board example, if you remember, on the turn, big blind was check raising his straights, big majority of the straights, which allows for the pre-flop aggressor to be barreling the river aggressively against a range that does not have that many straights and that have more 1-pair hands and 2-pair hands. Then if this is our assumption, then we just betting flop, betting turn, checking the river. Last thing that I want to put emphasis on is about experimenting. So a lot of players that I've worked with are just thinking about how will their play look like. So, I will look stupid calling this on the river. I will look stupid betting a random hand on the turn because it's not GTO. People will think I'm weak, I'm playing with, high stakes regs here. I don't want to be to have bad reputation in their eyes, and all nonsense arguments like that. I think the best in the game became so good by experimenting and by making mistakes and by having the balls to go for a boat play, to go for a eccentric play, following their gut and their intuition, because it's all about how do you perceive the spot. How does your opponent think about your range? It's not what your range looks like. It's impossible to know what your range looks like on 10 tables. But it's not so hard to figure out what your opponent is thinking about your play or about your line, because these are population tendencies that come across many different spots that deviate a lot from the solvers. So you have all my support to be making eccentric plays, even at the risk of ruining your reputation and making mistakes, just because this is the only way to find different plays, to find plays that are not understood by the population, and to be maximizing your EV. Blindly following the solver will never yield a very high EV. So that was it for the barreling without equity. Now I like to leave some time for discussion. If you guys have any questions, or if we had some questions unanswered, because I saw you guys asking a lot of questions, I couldn't answer all of them, trying to go over all of our examples here. We will definitely punt a little bit more after. Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. Because even if you punt some spot, know that 10 other spots people will be overfolding against your aggression. So those punts will be justified, my friend. If there are no further questions, thank you so much about your time and attention, about the fact that you actively participated and helped me lead this session. And I hope it was productive for you, because it was productive for me as well, learning some new things while doing the work. And I'm very thankful for this opportunity, guys. Please reach out in Discord if there are any questions, and see you next time.